welcome back to Dylan's Little Hobbies, and in today's video, I am going to be reviewing a little series called Death Note. Now, Death Note, what did I initially think about the anime? Well, first off, I have to say this, stories like this, I typically end up loving, and I typically end up not going into myself. I typically see stories like this and I say they're not for me. I walk away from them. And that's what I did the first time I heard Death Note. Stories like this, what is it, a monster show, ghouls and goblins, that's just not my kind of thing. I'm not really into scary stuff. I'm not really into gory stuff. I'm not really into anything Halloween at all. I typically stay away from stories like this, and typically it takes me a little bit of a push to get into shows like this. I mean, it took me a little bit of a push to get into Sherlock Holmes, which is a fantastic story. It took me into a little push to get into Supernatural, which is, again, a fantastic story. And there's a whole bunch more. I could list them off constantly, but then we'll never get into this video. The fact is, I typically would not watch a show called Death Note. Just the name, Death Note. It sounds like a wild ride, and trust me, it is. But it sounds spookier than the show actually ended up being. What Death Note truly is, and we are going to get into it today. Let's go ahead and start with the main part of the story. The main character. It all starts out with this character named Light Yagami, who I actually had to look up that name because I am, of course, terrible. I am just terrible with names. I really am. I had to look it up on Google to find out what his last name was, Light Yagami. I only know him by his code name Kira, which Kira is apparently the god of death, and because Light Yagami ends up killing everybody, they end up calling him Kira. He takes the name for himself and he becomes the new god of death. And what I really like about this character is he's the villain. He is the villain, and he is the main character. The show isn't about a good guy trying to catch a bad guy. The show is about how the bad guy can stay one step ahead of the good guys. This show really is about the villain, not the hero, which I really enjoyed the hero as well, but let's go ahead and get into the character of Light Yagami. I really enjoyed him. Because when when the show starts out, he's a young boy, and I think he's in high school actually. He's a young boy, and he's just a normal kid. Going to school, sees a couple bullies, he's a little bit popular, but other than that, he's pretty much a normal kid. He has a good heart and a good sense of justice. In fact, he's on his way of becoming a cop like his father. He's a great character in terms of that, and that's why I love Villon so much. I love villain backstories, because if you take a villain and you go into its backstory and you see how a good guy, doesn't matter how good you are, we all have just a little bit of evil inside of us, and it only takes the right buttons to press to end up becoming something you never thought you could. And that's how Light Yagami really started out. Light Yagami, he's a good kid, he's a good guy, has a good heart. But when he accidentally stumbles onto the Death Note and writes it in the first time, that cements his fate to become a true villain on the edge of society, constantly running from the law and constantly trying to rule the world. Basically what happens is Light Yagami ends up finding the death note. He takes it home. He writes in it. The book says any name written down in this book will die. He tests it out as a joke, thinks it's fake. It ends up being real, and he ends up having to decide whether or not he should throw it away and never touch the thing again, especially because he ended up just killing someone, or if he can actually change the world. The world is in chaos. There's villains everywhere. There's bad guys everywhere. Could, like Yagami, become the god of the new world? He thinks to himself, and I love the fact that he has a god complex. He thinks to himself that if he starts taking down these bad guys, that the world will start looking at him as if he's God. He can change the world for the better. He can change the world to be a better place, and that's what he wants to do. Unfortunately, it comes at so many costs. First off, he doesn't get to go to heaven or hell. He actually is cursed by the one who gave him the book in the first place. There is this Shikigami. I think I'm pronouncing that word wrong. Shikigami? I just got done watching the show last night. Why can't I pronounce Shikigami? Is it Shikigami? I think that's how you pronounce that road. That word, Shikigami. Basically, they are gods of death, apparently. They come from a whole different world, dimension. They write people in their books and they instantly die. And the Shikigami was getting bored and tossed his book into the human world, wanted to see who picked it up and wanted to go on a little bit of a joyride. I thought we were going to end up having this whole arc with the underworld, with the Shikigami, and the story could have gone that route, and I kind of wished it did, but I can't deny that the story, even without that, ended up being completely fascinating. In fact, you can take the whole Shikigami storyline out of the book completely, and you still end up with this very amazing, very interesting whole story about just the villain trying to stay one step ahead of the detectives. In fact, he becomes a detective himself, looking for himself, just to throw everybody on his trail, off his trail. I enjoyed it very, very much. So he starts writing in the books. He starts becoming Kira, and of course, people start noticing that all of these bad guys, these criminals, are starting to die, typically from heart attacks, but you can write just about anything in the book, and that's how they'll die. He ends up writing so many names that it's pretty obvious that someone is killing them, and so they need the world-class detective on the case. So they bring in the character of Elle. Now, Elle ended up being one of my favorite parts of the show. At first, I thought, this is really, really weird. This is not my thing. I almost dropped it after Elle's was introduced. But I can't deny there's something about Elle that I really enjoyed. And I believe what it is just the way he ended up detective-ing, I guess, the case. Because he ends up solving the case, but he doesn't have cement proof on how to go around it. He doesn't have cement proof on how to buckle down and capture Kira and arrest him. Kira always stays one step ahead of Elle. And eventually, does Kira win? Does he win? I'm not spoiling that. I'm not spoiling the end of the show, but I will say this. The whole series was just a complete fun ride. It really, really was. I loved the detective work, the detective aspect of it. Of course, I could go into how the book actually works and all that, but of course, I am just trying to encourage you guys into watching it and reviewing it for yourselves. So I'm not wanting to spoil how the book works, how the series ends. I did watch all 37 episodes. It's only 37 episodes, and I binge watched it in about 2.5 weeks. I enjoyed it very, very much. It has such a great detective story of how Kira, like Yagami, is just trying to stay one step ahead of L, how he's trying to beat L. There's this weird, almost forced romance between the character of Light Yagami and the character Misa. Misa ends up being she ends up loving Light just because he's Kira, and so she goes and meets him, and he has no choice but to use her. And at first, he's a good guy. He's just a good character, a good person with a good heart, and he ends up using everybody. By the end of the story, he ends up becoming a true and terrible villain. One of the best stories I have ever read. He truly has a god complex, and you can see how it builds up. It's just interesting. Something that I really liked is even in the moments that you are supposed to be able to breathe, you can't. Like, the whole story is taking place. You basically follow Kira, and the whole story is almost like Yagami, Kira's perspective. And even in the moments that you should be able to breathe, you're being hunted by cops. There is no moment that I felt safe watching this show. I always felt like he was going to get caught. And that's something that I really thought was very impressive of the show. Even in the moments that are supposed to give you a breather, you don't feel safe. You feel like you're the villain itself. You feel like you're going to get caught. It's fantastic. Something that I really enjoyed about. Then again, I will say this, that might be actually a bad thing, because that means you watch this whole series, it goes by very, very quickly, and you never really have a chance to go, oh, what a fantastic, until the end. You don't have a chance to breathe, because even in the moments that you're supposed to, you can't. Because you're always about to get caught. The villain is always about to get caught. It's truly the story of how a good guy can turn into one of the greatest villains. It's truly a story that shows how, however good you are, we still have a little bit of evil in us. It only takes the right buttons to press to turn us into the world's greatest villain in all of history. I enjoyed Death Note for that. The Shikigami, it's a big part of the show, I know, but I wasn't really fascinated by the Shikigami story. In fact, the most part that I was fascinated by was just the detective work of L and, of course, Kira trying to stay one step ahead of L. It was just great. And how they ended up ending the show, I think was very interesting. I was not expecting it to go the way it went. Then again, you watch the show, you guess, you think you know what's going to happen, and it ends up always going into a totally different direction. It's one of those shows, and it really makes it a good time. I would highly, highly recommend this show to anyone. especially if you like a little bit of detective story. Now, granted, there is a Shikigami, there is a magical book that kills anyone you write in it, so yeah, you gotta take it with a little bit grain of salt, but the detective work in the show is probably one of the best detective work stories I have ever read. Thank you guys for watching. And I say read, but I actually watched it. I did briefly go over the manga to see what the differences were. There's not really very many to talk about. Like, the whole show is basically just directly printed off of the manga. And I like shows like that. Thank you guys for watching, and I am out. Bye.